In this lecture, we are going to learn about physical development in adolescence. Our agenda for today is to first review the nature of adolescence, and then we'll talk about some of the physical and psychological aspects of puberty. Then we'll talk about dimensions of adolescent sexuality, and we will wrap up this lecture with a brief discussion of adolescent health. Are you ready? Let's get started. So, there are certainly many positive and negative views of adolescence. Where does society get their ideas about what adolescence is? Well, mostly from the media. But the idea that adolescence is a time of storm and stress goes back to the early 1900s when a psychologist by the last name of Giselle wrote one of the first textbooks on adolescence. And in this book, he described adolescence as a time of storm and stress. Since the early 1900s, a lot of research has been done with this developmental stage. The research shows that this time is not a time of any more storm and stress than any other stage involving children, and that any conflict is usually resolved pretty quickly. Now, the exception is if the parents had a very tumultuous relationship with their adolescents during childhood. So, if there was a lot of conflict prior to adolescence, we would see that conflict continue into adolescence. Now, many adults measure their current perspectives of adolescence by memories of their own adolescence and what they went through. But it is important to note that the experiences of today's adolescents are not the same as those of adults today. And we also have to keep in mind that many adolescents negotiate the path to adulthood quite successfully. But we do have to keep in mind that there are still many adolescents who do not receive adequate support to become successful adults. So when we are in adolescence, there are two important developmental transitions that take place. The first is from childhood to adolescence. And some of the big changes are those biological changes that include the growth spurt, hormonal changes, and sexual maturation. Other changes that we will talk about in subsequent lectures include cognitive changes in abstract, idealistic, and logical thinking, and socio-emotional changes that include seeking independence, conflict with parents and learning how to resolve it, and having a desire to spend more time with their friends, and also learning how to trust others and providing more self-disclosure. There's also an increased interest in romantic relationships. Now, as we move from adolescence into adulthood, that time period that we refer to as emerging adulthood, this is another important transition, and it is mostly determined by cultural standards and experiences. Here in our culture, what we see during this transition is a lot of experimentation, exploration. There's some instability in terms of trying to find oneself and moving from the family of origin, maybe to college or maybe to their own place to live. And the self-focus is really important. This really characterizes that next developmental period of the emerging adult. So let's take a look at some of the physical and psychological aspects of puberty. Now, puberty is defined as that period of rapid physical maturation that involves both hormonal and bodily changes. These primarily occur during early adolescence, and puberty tends to occur in a particular sequence for both boys and for girls. So for girls, menarche, which is their first menstruation, occurs rather late in the time frame of puberty. So this means that let me explain this. The mean age at the beginning of the growth spurt in girls is at 9 years of age. For boys, the beginning of that growth spurt is around 11 years of age. The peak rate of those puberty changes occurs at 11 and a half for girls and at 13 and a half years for boys. So those are some differences as we see girls continue to be ahead of boys in terms of physical development. So what we're going to see is an increase in height of about 3.5 inches per year for girls and about 4 inches per year for boys. We're also going to see a lot of hormonal changes during puberty. So keep in mind that hormones are chemicals that are secreted by the endocrine system, specifically the endocrine glands located throughout our body, and they are carried to the different parts of the body through the bloodstream. Now, the endocrine system's role in puberty involves the interaction of a few different glands, including the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and the sex glands, which are also known as the gonads. Now, when the pituitary gland, through its interaction with the hypothalamus, sends a signal to or they're going to send the signal via the gonadotropins, which are those hormones that will stimulate the sex organs, the testes or the ovaries, to the appropriate gland to manufacture the hormone. So testosterone is associated with male puberty and estradiol is associated with female puberty, but we can both produce both. It's just boys produce more testosterone and girls produce more estradiol. Now, in the United States, the average age of menarche has declined significantly since the mid-19th century. So there's a number of different factors that are believed to have contributed to the earlier onset of puberty. These include nutrition, health, and other environmental factors that will affect the timing and makeup of puberty. So for boys, the puberty sequence may begin as early as age 10 or as late as 13 and a half years and may end as early as 13 years or as late as 17 years. For girls, menarche normally appears between the ages of 9 and 15. Now, some children will go through precocious puberty, which is the very early onset and rapid progression of puberty. It occurs in girls 10 times more, or I should say it is 10 times more likely to occur in girls. And as a result, the girls can have a short stature, early sexual capability, and this can lead to the potential for engaging in age inappropriate behaviors. So it can be treated by medically suppressing gonadotropic secretions. So there's a lot of psychological dimensions of puberty. The first is body image. So it's important to keep in mind that adolescents are preoccupied with their bodies. Girls are generally less happy with their bodies and the changes that are happening during puberty. And girls also tend to have a more negative body image than boys throughout puberty. In terms of those adolescents who go through either early maturation or late maturation, the findings are mixed. So, for example, some recent studies suggest that it can be advantageous for boys to be early developing as opposed to late developing. For girls, it is not quite the same. In girls, early maturation may increase their vulnerability to problems such as depression, the development of eating disorders, and the possibility of them engaging in earlier sexual experiences. In terms of the study of the adolescent brain and looking at the changes of the adolescent brain, this is something that has only recently begun in the scientific community. Now, one thing that we do know is that there is significant structural changes that occur in the adolescent brain. So, for example, the corpus callosum, which is that fibrous bundle of nerves that connects the left hemisphere and right hemispheres of the brain, is going to thicken in adolescence, This improves their ability to process information as it can be quicker for information to be sent from one hemisphere to the left. The prefrontal cortex doesn't finish maturing until emerging adulthood, but another structure, the amygdala, which plays a role in emotional regulation, such as anger, matures earlier than the rest of the prefrontal cortex where it is located. Although adolescents can be very capable of experiencing very strong emotions, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed adequately enough at this point where they can control these strong, intense emotions. Now, sexuality is a big part of adolescent development. So, adolescence is the time when humans learn how to control and manage things like sexual arousal, attraction, and intimacy. One of the key milestones for adolescence is being able to develop a sexual identity. Adolescents must learn to master the emerging sexual feelings and forming a sense of sexual identity that involves learning to manage things like sexual arousal and attraction. They are also developing new forms of intimacy and learning the skills that they need to regulate their sexual behavior to avoid undesirable consequences. There are diverse patterns of initial attraction in individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, and sometimes these patterns of initial attraction may show that the individual can have bisexual attractions as well. Now, as we look at the timing and trends in adolescent sexual behaviors, we see adolescents engaging in a progression of sexual behaviors. Now, the timing and sexual initiation can vary by different things such as the country of origin, gender, and other socioeconomic characteristics. Many adolescents are not emotionally prepared to handle sexual experiences, even if physically their bodies are telling them otherwise. And this is especially true in early adolescence. Most adolescents will become sexually active at some point during this developmental period. There are many risk factors for those who have sex in early adolescence, and these include issues with developing sexually transmitted infections and teen pregnancy. Now, adolescents are increasing their use of contraceptives, but many do not use them correctly or use them inconsistently. This can lead to unwanted consequences like STIs or sexually transmitted infections, and approximately 25% of sexually active adolescents will become infected with an STI each year. Now, in addition to adolescents, there are other groups that are at most risk for developing STIs in addition to being an adolescent. So this can include those who use IV drugs, with other people who have STIs. Young homosexual males are more likely to develop STIs. Individuals living in low income circumstances also are more likely to develop STIs. When we look at the statistics from different ethnic backgrounds, Latinos and African Americans are also more likely to develop STIs. So another consequence of not using contraceptives or using them incorrectly is teen pregnancy. Surprisingly, the United States has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the industrialized world, even though it has dropped over the last few decades. We are still pretty high. There are a lot of risks to adolescent pregnancies, and these include health risks for both mother and baby. Also, adolescent mothers are more likely to face financial and educational difficulties. So, what does the health of an adolescent look like? Well, adolescence is described as being a critical juncture in the adoption of behaviors relevant to health. We do know that some of the behaviors that we develop in terms of our healthy lifestyle or not so healthy lifestyle in adolescence can continue into adulthood. Now, adolescents in the United States eat more junk food than adolescents in most other countries. Adolescents in the United States also have decreased the amounts of fruits and vegetables that they consume daily, and we have seen this over the last several years. And probably no surprise, U.S. adolescents also exercise less than those in other countries, although we do see some differences among different groups of adolescents. Now, adolescents also do not get enough sleep. And inadequate sleep in adolescence is associated with things like fatigue, irritability, falling asleep in school, and also mental health diagnoses like depression and anxiety. We also have seen through some recent research that adolescents' biological clocks or their circadian rhythms do shift as they get older, and this is a result of a delay of the sleep producing hormone melatonin. And the research has suggested that it is better that adolescents start school later because it works better with their biological clocks in terms of their sleep wake cycle. When it comes to causes of death in adolescence, accidents, homicide, and suicide are the leading causes of death. Substance use also is very prevalent in adolescents in the United States, and the United States has the highest rate of adolescent drug use of any industrialized nation. Alcohol, cigarette smoking, marijuana, and painkillers are those substances that are used most frequently by this age group. Alcohol use by secondary school students has declined in recent years, but for college students, we have not seen any decreases in alcohol use, and we've actually seen an increase in heavy drinking among those in college. So those would be those in later adolescence. Males engage in using alcohol more than females do. Now, smoking in adolescence has been associated with permanent changes in the lungs and also an increased risk of lung cancer, even if the smoker quits. For those who do smoke, they usually begin smoking in adolescence. Now, a recent analysis of data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health revealed that adolescents are also affected by the opioid epidemic, and this also includes medications like Vicodin and Oxycontin. So, oftentimes, adolescents may have injuries and they are prescribed opioids to help manage their pain. And if that is not managed correctly, it can lead to an addiction. Currently, physicians do try to use other types of methods for managing pain to try to stop this opioid epidemic. So, why do adolescents experiment with drugs and alcohol? There can be a lot of reasons, but one thing that we do know is that prevention can work. We also know that parental control and monitoring are linked with lower drug use. If adolescents have a good support system, they have folks that they can talk to about issues or concerns they have that can lower the risk of them using drugs and alcohol. Also, if they have developed effective coping skills in childhood, they will bring those skills with them into adolescence so that they don't turn to drugs and alcohol as a way to help them deal with the difficulties that they might experience in adolescence. Now, because of some of the concerns that adolescents have about their body image, it is not uncommon to see adolescents developing eating disorders. Girls who feel negative about their bodies in adolescence are more likely to develop eating disorders. However, those who have positive relationships with their parents tend to develop healthier eating habits. Also, girls who are sexually active in adolescence are also more likely to have disordered eating and meet the diagnostic criteria for eating disorders. So, just real quickly, there are two key eating disorders that we usually see in adolescence. Now, just a side note, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual also includes binge eating disorder, which can occur in adolescence, but usually we're going to be more likely to see either anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa. And anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder that involves a pursuit of thinness through starvation. So the individual, no matter how thin they are, their perception is that they are overweight and that they need to lose more weight. So they usually do that by going to the extreme to restrict calories and not eating, or they might just eat one type of food in very limited amounts. Bulimia nervosa is also known as the binge and purge eating disorder, and this is where the individual will consume large amounts of food in a short period of time, more so than somebody else of the same body size would. And then those who have bulimia nervosa will do something to get rid of it. Usually, this is through self induced vomiting or using laxatives. Bulimia nervosa and anorexia nervosa are both very dangerous and do run the risk of death if the individual does not receive treatment. Treatment can be challenging, but the good news is about 70% of individuals will eventually recover. So usually treatment will involve a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, nutritional counseling, and family therapy. So that concludes physical development in adolescence. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to send me an email. And thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.